The human, the subject, and the paradoxical human subject, reflecting on dialectical materialism, a discussion between Russell and Telosbound. This is featured in Reconstructing A is A. The work of Trey at Telosbound is an endless source of insight and inspiration, and as of April 2022, he spoke with Russell, bringing to my attention a distinction in Žižek's thought that I had never before caught. This inspired me to write this very short piece to insert toward the start of Reconstructing A is A, Part 1, though admittedly the rest of the book is already written, and it's too late for me to go through the text and change my terminology accordingly, as is the case with the fate of beauty, digressions, and so on. I will continue to use human and subject as basically interchangeable throughout my thinking, but here I at least wanted to note how human and subject perhaps shouldn't be used as similes. In fact, defining them apart, we can understand the phrase the human subject as beautifully capturing the great paradoxical tension that we are and live with daily. The work of O.G. Rose emphasizes how paradox defines us ontologically, how we naturally think of the world in terms of A is A, and yet we are beings which cannot be captured in simple A is A thinking. A lot more can be said about that, but all we need to know for now is that humans are strange tensions which are constantly at risk of effacement and self-destruction. However, it would be erroneous to say humans are suicidal, for though Freud was right about our death drive, we also have an ego drive, which isn't so quick to throw in the towel. All in all, we are a bizarre and difficult to understand mixture. The human entails a self that desires to be, while the subject is primarily constituted by a lack, to allude to Lacan or the philosophy of lack series we did with Cadell and Tim and Ebert, which seeks to end its feeling of lack. Unfortunately, the subject is that lack, so if the lack is done away with, so too will the subject be effaced. The human doesn't want to be erased, and so fights the tendency of the subject to erase itself out of being by filling itself out of being, per se. We tend to associate filling ourselves with gaining fuller being, but though that might be true for the human, the subject is actually lost precisely because the subject is a lack. But is that a bad thing? If the subject is fundamentally a lack, we'd be better off to live without it, wouldn't we? Well, it would seem that way, but we are human subjects, which means the subject is fundamentally part of us. If we erase it, we will erase ourselves. We must be a mixture of self-destruction and self-interest, a paradoxical and profound tension, consisting of sides trying to devour one another. We are the devourer and devoured. And if we stop eating or being nutritious, we cease. If we are complete at all, we are complete like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. As discussed throughout O.G. Rose, humans are not AA beings, which can be associated with Aristotle's A is A. Rather, humans are AB, which is to say we are essentially paradoxical, ironic, and tragic. Both the human and the subject are AA to themselves, but to one another they are AB, a different A is A. Together, then, we have an AB, and it is this AB which defines us in our daily lives. Following Žižek, the phrase, the human subject, captures how we are an AB being, a mixture of lack and being, that thus exists as a becoming, for our being is always trying to fill our lack, while our lack is always trying to devour our being. We are a profound give and take, and if we are all give, we don't exist, but if we are all take, then we stabilize and undergo effacement. We take what we give ourselves, and as long as there is always giving, there can always be taking, and thus we can continue to exist. But that means our existence necessitates a constant tension, which makes possible drive and change, but what makes possible that drive and change is precisely what can cause us deep existential suffering. But this is us. In closing, I wanted to briefly highlight the possibility of understanding the human as toward being while the subject is toward lack, which makes the human subject an entity which is toward both at the same time, causing paradox, pathology, and the like. This is not language I will use in my work regularly, but I wanted to note it still. This strangeness is why understanding humans is so difficult, for what does it mean to understand something strange? And it will take the truism of the rational trilogy to explore. Our strangeness also unveils why we can find streaks of self-destruction and yet also radical egotism in the same human being. Perhaps this is why, what it means that Jacob wrestled with God. It is another subject, but in the conversation, Trey and Russell touched on another question I believe is of great importance. Does the incompleteness of reality cause subjects, or do subjects cause reality to be incomplete? If reality is complete in of itself, though, and subjects made it incomplete, how did reality arise to incomplete subjects to make such occur? This question opens many doors, everything from metaphysics to the vector theory of Alung and Bard. Incompleteness emerges between vectors, for example. To frame the question another way and in terms of Derrida, how are we able to create gaps between signifiers and the signified? On typography by O.G. Rose, we'll discuss the need for us to focus on the raw act of apprehending thatness, but still the question hovers. How do we create gaps? Where do lacks come from? Did a complete reality emerge to something ontologically distinct from it, with the vector of mind perhaps, which in never being able to incorporate reality into itself in the same way ontologically, thus creates incompleteness? As will be discussed in Reconstructing ASA, are video cameras incomplete because they cannot film the screens they project onto without causing an eternal regression? Are mirrors incomplete because they cannot reflect one another? Or is the creation of eternal regression simply a feature of what it means to be a mirror? Is it simply a feature of being a subject that we cannot observe ourselves without deconstructing ourselves away? Does that make us incomplete or incomplete with the I in parentheses? Are we AA, BB, or AB? Why or why not? And thus the journey continues. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, YouTube, Anchor, Twitter, Instagram, so on and so forth, and thank Amazon, and thank you so much for your time.